So, hi, Jess.
Hello.
Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks.
I really appreciate joining you today. I am looking forward to having a discussion, all things love, with you. We've been discussing that for a while. So, to introduce you, is that okay?
Yep.
Jess is a client of mine and a very good friend. She's become a very good friend who is also becoming a coach since we've met. And Jess came to the Shasta retreat last spring. Oh my God, it's almost been a year. And we worked one-on-one together. We also did an attunement for Reiki 1 and Reiki 2 recently. And so I've asked her to come here and share more about herself, her story, and to even ask me some questions that she might have for me. And so we'll get started. Does that sound good?
Sounds awesome.
Did I anything else? No?
I think that covers it.
Okay. So let's start with, where were you born, or where did you grow up?
I was born in Durham, North Carolina, and grew up in North Carolina near Greensboro in a town called, though the address was Climax. So it was very exciting.
The address, like the street?
No, like the town.
The town was
Climax, North Carolina.
That's cute.
And I grew up on a horse farm, so not in a town, but near Greensboro.
You grew up, I did not know that you grew up on a horse farm.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, what constitutes a horse farm?
My mom trained and rode horses professionally, and then there were people who boarded horses on the farm that I grew up on.
Okay. Wow. So did you have to take care of all those animals? Was that part of the deal?
My first job in high school was mucking stalls and caring for horses and painting fences and throwing hay bales around and stuff on weekends.
Uh-huh. That's how I grew up.
Yep.
I just didn't get paid for it.
Yeah. I didn't get paid for it for a long time before I went on payroll. But it was, yeah. And there was, anytime that there was a snowstorm, which is probably still why I actually don't really love snowstorms, among other things. But everybody else would get to go out and go sledding or whatever, and we would be out there chipping ice out of ice buckets and mucking stalls as a family.
Yeah, taking care of all the animals, making sure that they were safe and provided for and warm and had food. And they're like your children. We were just talking about that.
Totally. Well, and farms are a lot of maintenance, right? So
they are.
Endless opportunities for all sorts of things. At least it means I got to learn to drive a tractor.
That's rad. You were actually allowed? That's cool.
Eventually, yes.
Okay.
I wasn't very good at it, so they sort of discontinued that program of hoping that I would mow the fields. But
So mowing the fields, how many acres?
35.
35?
Yeah.
Holy crap, that's a lot of land.
It is.
Wow.
It's beautiful, too.
I'm sure it was. They
are very close to closing on selling it.
Okay.
So that there's a family reunion planned in April before it's out of the family.
Wow. That's a huge transition in your family right now.
Really big.
You've got a lot going on right now.
Yeah.
We were talking a little bit before we got started off camera. And so, yeah, I don't mean to be secretive about that. Maybe that'll play out as we continue to talk. Okay, so I did not know about the horse farm. I knew you grew up with horses and riding horses and competing with horses. And I assume that you're really great. Didn't you do English?
Yeah, I did hunter riding and dressage.
And dressage.
Yep.
Wow. Did you love horses?
Yes. And then no.
Tell us why.
It was just what I grew up doing for the most part. And so I did really enjoy doing it, but I think it was also one of those things where it never kind of occurred to me that I was allowed to choose to not like it, right? And I didn't develop like a hatred of it or something like that. But I would remember in elementary school, kids would be like, oh my gosh, you want to live on a horse farm? That must be the best thing. And then I'd be like, no, it means I have to chip ice buckets when it's snowing instead of going sledding. Like, this is not that fun.
It seems glorious, doesn't it, from the outside?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of hard work.
Totally. And it occurred to me later, too, that like growing up riding competitively, this is not a ding on you, Mom, if you're listening. But I very rarely got to just go and ride a horse.
Yeah.
So I was always instructed.
Yeah.
And I had other coaches and stuff. I had many. It's probably part of why I've had a bevy of professionals as an adult, too, is I trained with I had my trainer, but then I would also, my mom was always out there if I was riding just even if I was just hacking the horse one day, Mom would be out there and there would be critique and
yeah. So you were always getting groomed, consistently groomed.
Yeah.
And so the joy of just having the freedom to ride however you wanted, whenever you wanted, was missing from your experience. I totally get that. My experience was the opposite, right? That no one was telling me how to ride. Well, if it was my older sister bossing me around because it was her horse, right? But no one was giving me particularly lessons. I don't even think I got lessons. They just kind of threw me up there and were like, okay, slow them down. Just kidding. I don't know. Maybe I did. I don't remember. But the point is I got to pretend that I was like Laura from, Little House on the Prairie and disappear for a bit.
I would only get that if I went out into the fields and cantered around, galloped around. Which I would do sometimes. Like there would be times that I would just be like, I just want to go and ride in the field today, which always meant galloping.
A horse.
And one of my parents' favorite memories of me, I think, is that anytime I would do that, my pony and I would just be galloping around the field, and I would be like, do, 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 at the top of my lungs because I loved watching the Indiana Jones movies. And I was just thinking, I can't remember which one it is, probably all of them, where there's scenes of him just like galloping on a horse. And my pony would get pretty into it too.
That's cute.
I loved the pony. Sometimes I did not love him so much when there was like 2 years straight where we were learning to change, what is it? Change leads or whatever you call it when you're cantering and you're supposed to switch to the other. And many other things. And there was every single horse show. And often at home, I would get dumped. I would fly off that pony all the time. It just really sucks to fall a lot.
It does. It hurts.
Yes.
It hurts a lot.
And a lot of what riding taught me.
Kicked?
Not by my own pony, but by other horses.
Okay.
And I've been bitten and attacked and seen horses literally kill each other. There was a lot of like other traumatic things that you witness and watching a horse give birth. That's pretty terrifying.
Yeah, I can imagine.
So
I haven't watched that, but it definitely we had a lot of animals growing up besides the horses, and so you learn a lot about death on a farm.
Yeah.
At least I did. I don't know what your experience was. I wouldn't say it was a farm, but because this is in Southern California, we had 1.5 acres. But, like a little mini farm, and we had many, many animals. And yeah, I was just talking about this the other day. There was a lot of death. You dealt with death, animals dying.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Because of extreme circumstances, or we were talking about my ducks in my backyard, right? Raccoons, or, just other animals that were predators or whatever. You didn't take good care of something or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So you learn consequences.
Yep.
Which I think was the intention behind my parents, right? And giving us something to do as girls. Mm-hmm. To keep us out of trouble, so to speak, right?
Well, I think a lot of people who rode horses too will say, what you most fundamentally learn is the sort of adage of, you fall off that horse, you get back on. You get back on immediately. Mm-hmm. There was only one time I was allowed to, out of probably hundreds of times falling off, there was one time I was allowed to not immediately get back on. It's because I hurt my shoulder.
Right.
And then I still had to immediately get back on.
Break through your fear.
Yeah.
Do you think that that's what it's about? And not letting the animal be in charge?
Yeah. When I did my first Ironman, I had people write index cards with little sayings that I would drop in the bags that you pick up along the way as motivation. And the one that my mom wrote was, "I'm the boss." And I was like, "Mom, where does this come from?" And she was like, "You don't remember?" I was like, "No. Please remind me." And then I was like, "Dear Lord, don't let this be something I really should have remembered." And she was like, "Your very first lesson ever." And I'm like, every ride was a lesson, but okay. Your very first official lesson with somebody other than my mom ever, when I was 4 or 5. It was a group. The way my mom tells the story is like, it was a group lesson, and Kathy Shalepi's, which is a pretty great name.
Yes.
And she had these little kids, myself included. Before we would be allowed to get on the horse, we had to put our little hands on our hips and then walk around the pony that we were going to ride and say, "I'm the boss. I'm the boss. I'm the boss." Just to like really embody that mindset.
I wish I had that on video.
Me too.
That's amazing. It's a great practice. I think that's a great practice even for women in general.
Yes.
Is putting your hands on your hip to take up a little bit of space in the world.
Yeah. Like the defiant girl or whatever that was in front of the bull and now is in front of, well, at least last I checked, was in front of the stock exchange.
Ooh. Are we talking about someone in specifics?
There's a statue.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know about that.
They put this statue of a little girl with a little pigtail, I think during the Occupy Wall Street or something like that. But she's a bronze. And she initially was like nose to nose with the bull at the tip of Manhattan in the Battery. And she was just staring down the bull, basically. Then, it's a very much like a power pose, except not with hands up high, but rather on her hips. Like, chest puffed out and legs just wider than shoulder width apart. And then they moved her, and now she's looking up in the stock exchange.
Huh.
Or at least she was during COVID when I would run by her a lot.
I forgot you lived in New York. Okay.
Yeah.
Forgot about that too. Okay. It's all coming back to me. Name something you cannot live without.
Tea.
Okay, me too. I cannot live without tea either.
Water.
Well, yes, I mean necessities. Yeah, but
being around bodies of water and stuff too. Mm-hmm. I've moved a bunch, but I don't like being very, very far from large bodies of water.
I agree.
It's weird to me.
Yeah. Lake, river, something. I even put one in my yard just so that I didn't have to be too far away from it.
Yeah.
Good answer. Tell me something unique or interesting about you that only those close to you would know.
I don't think I have a lot of these, but then my friends will be like, "You're always full of these new nuggets." One of which that I think a lot of people don't know, and because I forget to tell people, is that I have over 350 hours logged as a private pilot, and I have my pilot's license.
What? Jess, when are we going flying?
Well, that was I accrued most of those hours between ages 11 and 18.
Well, you just have to go up with I already know. Yeah.
Yeah.
You just go up and renew. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's like thousands of dollars to do that. But yeah.
Yeah, it is.
But yes, someday I look forward to doing that.
From 11 to 18, why at that age?
Anytime that either one of my parents it was rare that my parents would go out of town and leave us with the other one when I was growing up. But whenever that happened, especially if they took the other daughter with them, I think both of my parents would then make an effort to like come up with something fun and novel to do. And so my mom and my sister, I think both, were going to be out of town for some reason. Maybe my sister was doing something dance related when I was actually 10. And there was an airport near this restaurant that we used to go to a bunch that I always would just like, especially if planes were coming in or taking off, while we were heading into the restaurant, I would just like stand in the parking lot and stare at them. I loved planes. And I always enjoyed flying and stuff like that on the rare occasion we did that when I was a kid. And so I remember my dad being like, you want to take a flying lesson? And I was like, what? I didn't know that was a thing you could do. And I was like, well, obviously. And so, yeah, then he arranged for what's called a discovery flight where they take you up for about 20 minutes. And you touch the controls, but not much. But that was actually, I think, before I turned 11. And then on my 11th birthday, I got to do a true lesson.
Significant year.
Yeah. And then with Tim, that was my first instructor. And then I just kept doing it. My parents were nice enough to let me keep doing that. And then it became much easier when I wasn't riding anymore once I was 14 to focus on that, which was good because then I needed to start getting ready for soloing and because you can solo when you're 16 and you can get your license when you're 17.
That is so you are so cool.
It's all a facade. Super awkward person who does cool things.
Hey, me too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, I really wanted to go to the Naval Academy. Really, 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 really wanted to go to the Naval Academy because I knew that was the best way to increase my chance. It was very hard to become a fighter pilot for anyone. But especially at the point at which I was 12, it was nearly impossible for a woman to become a fighter pilot in the Air Force or the Navy, but especially in the Navy. And obviously after watching Top Gun, I wanted to fly for the Navy. You want to do the catapults. Who doesn't want to get catapulted off of a aircraft carrier and have to land with a hook?
Me.
This big. Right, most people. But I thought that sounded amazing. And F-14s are really cool. Top Gun. And so, yeah, I really wanted to go to the Naval Academy, but then my eyes went bad. And I was starting at 12, I was like, how do I make sure I can be a good candidate for the Naval Academy? But then my eyes went bad when I was 13. And then after.
And by bad, you mean you had to start wearing glasses.
Yeah.
Yes.
Not blind or anything. But at that time, they wouldn't accept laser surgery for fighter pilots. So I knew that was basically going to be a deal breaker unless something changed in the 5 years before I would have had to make a decision about college. And then we went to visit my grandparents in San Diego, and we were walking into a restaurant, and the naval airstrip across the bay or whatever it is, we were going to one of those restaurants where you can see a lot of stuff on the beach, and there was an F-14 taking off. And it was so close, and you could, and I knew what I was looking at as soon as you could hear it, and I was like, "That's an F-14," and it took off, and I just burst into tears. My parents were like, "Are you okay?" I think one of my parents was like, and I was like, "I'm never gonna be able to fly one of those," because I knew that there was. So I didn't go to the Naval Academy, but
and that's why.
Yeah, if I had had good eyes, I'm pretty confident I would have gone in the Naval Academy.
Been amazing.
And worked my ass off to be a fighter pilot.
Yeah.
And who knows whether that would have worked out or not and what else would have happened.
Yeah. You took a totally different route.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure.
How did you go from Naval Academy to getting into the work that you were doing up until recently?
Sure. So... Oh, how do we tell this in a short story? So I ended up going to Dartmouth for undergrad. Because when you visit in the summer, it looks amazing and beautiful. It looks like what college should look like.
You got tricked, is what you're saying?
No.
Look at your face.
But I was also stupid. I did every winter there. Nobody does every winter there. I did it's a quarter system, and they always. There was a phrase at the time that there's the suicide six, which is do not do 6 quarters in a row with no break, because you'll want to commit suicide by the end. I did 6,
intense.
Which ended with a winter. I did a fall to a winter, including a summer. It was a terrible idea. That winter was really hard. And there were other things that happened that made that winter really hard. But I also, when I was 19 and going back to campus sophomore year, I met what was to become my first husband in a frat basement. And courted him over the course of that quarter through a lot of...
You courted him?
Yes. Aggressively. And gave up on him at one point and then hooked up with his best friend. And then came back, and like a week later he took action. Expressed that
Do you think that it was specific to the fact that you slept with his best friend that made him take action?
Yes, actually.
Okay. All right. Was that strategic on your part?
No.
Okay. It was
I was not that smart.
Consequence.
I really, truly give it up. I really thought he wasn't. I was really like, he just isn't that into you, Jess. Like, we talked about it later, and I was like, I had been throwing myself at you for 3 months straight.
That's why.
And you kept not
because there's no
expressing any
pursuit.
interest. Yeah.
Yeah, masculine energy loves pursuit. They love challenge. They want to break through in the challenge, right?
Well, this guy's also
you
lazy.
have it too. You have masculine and feminine energy, right? So I had this interesting theory. I have an interesting theory. I've been throwing this around lately that a lot of my dating experience, I was mostly in my masculine, and I think I've narrowed it down as to why. You want to hear?
Yes.
Okay. Maybe this is true for you too, because I have a background of trauma, so I wanted control over my experience. And so I think it tipped me over into the masculine, and I thought that I had to make demands for everything that I wanted. And I think I just sat in that masculine thinking that I needed to be dominant. I think also, I am a 1 in numerology, so I do like to lead for sure. But yeah, I mean, if I'm honest, I think that really is where it came from, because receiving felt so passive. And I had been in and I consider feminine energy to be more receptivity, right? Not waiting, but like, making your requests known or your needs known, but then also being in receptivity and waiting for that to come to you.
Right.
Right? Not actively pursuing it and chasing it down.
Yes, that was not how I was raised.
That wasn't how I was raised either.
Remember, I'm the boss.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, I grew up with a very domineering mother. So I think there was a part of me that, because I wasn't ever allowed to be the boss, I jumped into being a boss, because I just didn't. I also didn't have a father to really model. I mean, he was around, but he was working full time. So I didn't really have a father to model like what that dance is between the masculine and feminine. So I thought, okay, well, I really have to chase that shit down, make it happen.
Right.
So I'm not saying my experience is your experience, but as a little segue there is something that I realized about me. Yeah. Okay. So you chased this man down, and then you gave up on him and slept with his best friend. And then you showed up with him, and you're at Dartmouth, and you are, I don't know how to pronounce it, and you are there for 6 semesters quarters that are terrible, and are not terrible, but a terrible combination. And you get into, what was your degree?
My major was history.
Okay.
My minor was Spanish. And then I almost minored in studio art. It was just that in order to minor in studio art, you had to take as many credits as you would have for any other major. It was weird. But if they had required the normal number of credits for a minor, I would have ended up minoring in studio art. So none of that is very, ostensibly useful coming out of college. But there's lots of studies about how that type of thing works out 15 years later.
Are there?
Yeah.
What kind of studies?
That people who major in the humanities don't do very well out of the gate, but end up with longer, 10, 15 years later, end up with higher salaries. Because an engineer, for example, will typically come out strong, but then you only can make so much more. Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you become irrelevant quickly, and they just hire the cheaper talent. Whereas somebody who studied liberal arts I just read Epstein's book Range, and so you have range.
Oh, I need to know about this book.
It's a really good book.
Okay.
but you end up with this more general, and I am a generalist. Like I feel like my dad always, at least I'm pretty sure he said he aspired to be a Renaissance man. And I very much adopt a lot of the same of like, I want to know a little bit about everything. And so that was kind of how I constructed and that was part of what attracted me to Dartmouth too, is like they want you to have a very well-rounded education.
So were you in marketing?
So coming out of school over the first few years of my, in hindsight, career, I ended up riding a bunch of waves of what was marketing and sort of evolved into quickly became digital marketing. And so early on, I did things like helping set up business intelligence systems, integrating Salesforce, integrating other like sort of predecessors to that. And I mean like from scratch, right? Because you're doing it when it's breaking technology. And then I did a bunch of things like automating, even though the reports themselves were not super revolutionary, they were largely financials. I used things like Excel macro. I taught myself, well, with the help of a friend, I taught myself, like I was taught myself Excel macros, and automated a bunch of reports, and then eventually convinced a DBA to let me write SQL, because I feel like people who would do data science and analytics now take for granted how much you had to like really cajole somebody into giving you access to these things even 10 years ago. But I was and I had to be good at cajoling tech people to do that. So then fast forward 5 more years and I shifted into product work and product analytics, and cajoling tech people was a really important part of the job. And then I got to start managing people about 7 years into things. And then just kept growing. And then my specialty sort of became growing and building and scaling teams, and eventually doing more of like restructuring teams and being like a change doing a lot of change management, not only with my own org, but analytics is often what businesses will use to drive large scale change within the business. And data, I don't know. I always liked that data convinced people to do things. It wasn't even that I liked the puzzles of doing the sort of technological stuff, and figuring out coding puzzles was fun for a little while. But the way that people get into data science,
so fun.
The way that people get into data science and analytics today is so different. And I think for better and worse, but I liked the storytelling, and I liked the working with just getting people to do things part. And that's still largely what I like about even the new direction I'm going to take.
Oh, for sure. Now it's coming full picture as to all of the different things that you can source while coaching others, right? You've been coaching others in business anyway. But
yes. Up, down, and sideways. Yes.
A lot of learning lessons there.
And I've always been better managing up and across than down. So I think that's part of why I'm like, coaching. I do better when I'm I like feeling more like peers. And I never saw my management as anything other than essentially peers with better paychecks.
Yeah.
And less visibility.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think that goes without saying, like, you're the teacher and the student, right? When you're a coach, really. Yeah. I mean, I am constantly learning stuff or receiving information that's both for me as well as for the person in front of me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we know so much now about your adult life. Mm-hmm. Let's get to, okay, you covered a lot of this. What was your favorite thing to do as a child? What did you love to do as a child?
Yeah. I really enjoyed just like going into the woods and making up stuff with my sister. I also really liked painting and drawing and anything like by myself. I enjoyed a lot of painting and drawing and like art projects. And then with my sister going outside. We lived like 3.5 hours from the beach, but I definitely always loved the beach. And like, there's this picture, I think it was actually a picture I brought to the retreat in Shasta. One of my favorite pictures of me as a kid. And I think the prompt was like, bring a picture of yourself as a kid.
Yes.
Like feeling like your best self or something like that, or most self-expressed. And it's me and this like in a life jacket with this hat that's like a little sailor's hat that says boat. And I'm just like,
so proud.
Yeah. And it was my grandparents' sailboat. But I liked boats. And I did water skiing a lot in high school.
I love water skiing. I miss water skiing.
Being around water, being outside, painting, drawing.
I didn't know we had so many similarities. This is really interesting. Okay. I mean, I knew about our family, but other than that. Okay. Let's see. What was it like to grow up in your family? Tell me about it.
I thought it was great for I think most of my childhood was pretty great. In part because like, I don't know the more I learn about other people's childhoods too, the more I'm like, no, it was really pretty great. My parents were both doing their best and they were building a lot. So like the farm that they bought when I was around 1, I don't remember this hole in the kitchen, but like I remember the farm not looking like it does today.
Of course.
And like, so the farm went from being very run down, not nice fencing, etc., to like a beautiful farm today. And I actually appreciated the fact that my parents had the farm and my sister and I just got sort of like turned out of the house a lot. Like I'm an older millennial. And so I'm probably one of the last generations that just got to like do stuff and not always be supervised.
Yeah.
But I still also had structure and like plenty of opportunity. My parents were always bending over backwards, if not more, if not possibly to their own detriment, to give us opportunities. And so like lots of schlepping us around and like doing whatever to give us chances to do things. And I got to do a lot of really cool stuff in high school, including like I got to start flying planes when I was 11. So things like that were great. I was encouraged. I remember it's been very awkward as an auntie to now be like, what is the appropriate age at which to give a child fill in the blank book? Because I was always just allowed to read whatever I wanted and provided with stuff that would stretch my reading opportunities. And so I distinctly remember in 6th grade, the beginning of middle school, I was always reading something. I read a lot. I still read a lot, but I read a lot growing up. And I was sitting in class before English class started reading the book that I was reading at the time. And my teacher looked over and she was like, "That's a big book. What are you reading, Jessica?" And I was like, "Clan of the Cave Bear." And she got like visibly uncomfortable. I was only halfway through. I hadn't gotten all the sex yet. And she was like, "Do your parents know that you're reading that?" And I was like, "My mom gave me this book, lady. Like, what do you want from me?" And she was like, "You have got to be kidding me." And then apparently my mom basically got called. And the woman was like,
confirm.
"How did you give your daughter Clan of the Cave Bear?" And my mom was like, "Yeah." She likes fantasy books. Like she likes stuff that's like from different times and places. I thought she'd like it. And I think I remember my mom saying that the teacher then was like, "Do you not remember what like the last third of the book is all about?" And I think my mom was, if this came up, I can only imagine my mother, this is something I generally love about my mother, probably was like, "She's 12. It's about time she learned." Like that's how I would much rather she learn about loving sex in a book than like some other methods.
Yeah.
And like, yes, we talked to her about like,
we've talked to her by now.
I approached my parents when I was 6 years old being like, "Did you know that when people have sex, it involves putting this and that?" And I think my parents just laughed and were like, "Yep."
Okay, so you were very educated.
Right.
You were very educated.
Yeah, education was a huge value and still is for my family. So that stuff was all great. I generally had a good relationship with my sister that I still really value. I mean, I think any time that you're 3 years apart, you should just expect that children are like not going to really get along from the time that they're like 13 and 10 until like 12 and 9 maybe.
What do you think is the magic between 3 years?
Well, it's just that's a big age separation. When you are then 12, like from 12 years old with the younger, I was the older one. From me being 12 until me being 16, there's just such a big difference in maturity. And also, like, we're competing for the resources of things like my parents' transportation time and energy and stuff like that, right? Like, we don't really have much in common development, like just watching the sort of developmental cycles of children. I stopped playing. I wanted to stop playing with my sister. Like, I played with her sort of, in the, like, not, I wouldn't let my friends know, but I still played dolls or whatever with her until I was about 12.
Right.
But then by the time I was 12, I was like, no, I really got to stop. Like, this really isn't cool anymore.
Yeah.
But then, like, we didn't really have anything
In common anymore.
until I started driving. And then she was the way my sister describes it, I don't really remember this, but my sister describes it as, like, when I initially started having to transport my sister, because we went to school in Greensboro, so it was like a 35-minute drive each way. My parents were very excited for me to start driving.
I'm sure.
And my job was to, the sort of in exchange for the car, I had obviously transported my sister. And the way she describes it is that initially I was this, like, annoying, it was, like, super annoying that I had to drive my sister around. And then I'm like, okay, but by the time I was 17, it was like taking you to parties. Like, we were just hanging. Like, I didn't not go to the parties just because I had to pick you up from the movie theater at 8 o'clock, but I would go pick you up from the movie theater and take you to the party, and then I would make sure to leave before the cops came. Like,
So she benefited.
Yeah. And we got closer then and have been close since. So that stuff was all great. There's, like, things, I think, especially in retrospect, but overall it was great. It was just a lot started happening in my family when I was probably around, I don't know when it exactly started, but probably 14 or 15. And, like, just a lot started going down. Like, and I think about the fact my parents were young. They were around my age now at that point. And I'm like, oh, you were dealing with all this adulting shit while you also had teenagers? Gross. Like, okay. I have a lot more grace. I give them a lot more grace now. Plus, you've helped with that. So thanks.
You're welcome, but you did it.
Yeah.
All I did was show you a different way. Yeah, I couldn't do the work. You had to do it. And you've done great. Okay, so then let's move into that, because I had that down here. Can you tell us more about some of the major shifts that happened when you were about 14 or 15?
Yeah. Somewhere in there, I don't remember exactly what years and what sequencing, my uncle, who was my mom was youngest of 4. The next youngest, my Uncle David, was probably one of the aunts and uncles I was closest to as well. Even though he lived in California, we lived in North Carolina. He developed lung cancer and after a couple years passed away. And that was heartbreaking, like, for anybody involved to watch. Shortly after he was diagnosed with lung cancer, my grandfather had a massive stroke. And my grandparents were living in San Diego at the time. Uncle was living in LA at the time. And so my mom spent a lot of time flying
back and
to
forth,
Southern California and spent a lot of time watching and helping them, doing as much helping as you can do as somebody who's dealing with major health issues. And being in and out of hospitals, I haven't done much of, but it's not fun. And it's just, I think, a twilight zone and kind of a mind fuck. And then there's all the peripheral things, like, my uncle's relationship with his wife was going, from what I understand, I don't know, it wasn't my relationship and I wasn't there, but I understand that was having challenges, which I don't know. They had a young daughter, and my uncle had lung cancer. Like, I don't know. That sounds really hard. Mm-hmm. But being family, I think that's just a lot. Mm-hmm. And then now, in hindsight, my grandmother passed a few years ago, but, or somewhere in the last 5 years, like, what is time? I don't know. COVID's really ruined my sense of how long ago anything was, but not a long time ago, but not like last year. I think 2019 or something like that. And she had advanced dementia by the time she passed. And so in hindsight, you look back and you're like, I don't think we know yet exactly what the progression of dementia is, but my grandmother I remember visiting them before my grandfather passed when I was in college. And there was one point at which my now ex-husband, but then boyfriend, and I were watching TV after they had gone to bed. My grandmother came out. This was like after my uncle had passed, but before my grandfather passed, but after the stroke. My grandmother came out at one point with no pants on and talked to us for like 5 minutes, and like not even underwear. And then after about 5 minutes of chatting with us, and I was like worried she was sleepwalking or something at first. And then it sort of became clear that that probably wasn't true. And then she eventually looked down and she was like, I'm not wearing any pants. And I was like, that's true.
You handled it really well.
And then she was like, I'm going to go back to bed. I was like, good night, Grandma. Love you. And then I was just sort of like, I'm sorry. To my boyfriend. And he was like, it's the least weird thing that's happened with your family in recent years in some ways.
That was the least weird.
In some ways. I mean, my parents fought a lot when I was, from the time I was sort of 19, it probably started before then, because I remember thinking when I was in college that like sometimes college was a nice break from the family dynamic of, I think my parents fought a lot and they fought not kindly.
And why do you think that it ramped up when you were a teenager specifically?
I think empty nest was really hard on my parents. And like that starts when you start driving or whatever. Like the empty nest starts way before the kid actually leaves the house, from what I can tell.
So they were worried about missing out on the relationship and it stressed them out?
Well, I think there's some identity stuff that was wrapped up in that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, I'm psychoanalyzing my parents now, right?
Yeah,
but
that's true.
I think there was also like some of the things that there was a lot of oversharing with me on both sides over the years. So I know a lot about what both of them, the stories that they have. And, I think it was a combination of my dad was, sort of his version of a midlife crisis was what a lot of, I feel like my friends are going through right now, which is like, okay, so I've achieved all the things that I like thought I wanted to achieve, but none of that actually feels like an achievement. And that's not actually very fulfilling. So WTF, now what? Like what, but I don't want to like step away from all this. I've built my life. I have this mortgage that's kind of predicated on these choices I made. Shit, what do I do? And especially if you have kids, I can't imagine. Feel it, how like trapped you must kind of feel by that sensation or that like sense of reality, whether it's a reality you can change or not. So I think my dad was dealing with some of that on the one hand. And then I think my mom was going through more of like, at least feeling like she had put everybody else first for at least my whole life. And especially having been raised through with second wave feminism principles and so on. I remember, whether it was in high school or college, one of my best friends at the time, we've stayed somewhat in touch since, has told me even in recent years that what she always remembers most about my mom is this conversation at the breakfast table at my parents' house where my mom was like, I'm going to tell you about the great lie. They're going to tell you can have it all. I don't care what year it is. You cannot have it all. Like you cannot do a great job, but the job that you think you want to do, be a great mother, have a great body, and feel fulfilled in yourself and like spend time for yourself. You cannot do all of those things. It is not humanly possible. So don't let anybody tell you that you're failing if you're not doing any of that. Like you're probably going to do all of it poorly and like not do a single one of those things well. And sometimes at the time I would be like, Jesus, why are we, what? Can we not? There's a few other really great my mom quotes along those lines that I at the time was like, Jesus. But now I'm like, yeah. Yeah, I like you. But just very real too, right? But I think she was struggling with I think that comment probably came out of some of her own sense
Of
of like,
course.
and I think she was trying to be a good daughter and sister and wife and mother and all these things. And meanwhile, like she was a professional rider and trainer basically so that she could keep horses, so that she could live on the same property as her horses, because otherwise we wouldn't have been able to afford that.
Right. They're very expensive investments.
And I don't think that career choice necessarily played out the way that she would have ideally liked, because, you know, especially to ride at like she wanted to go to the Olympics, and I too we were so close to that level, and like rode with people who rode in the Olympics and stuff like that. But you basically have to ride somebody else's horse to get there unless you have millions of dollars yourself.
Right.
And that's a whole other ball game too. And like wasn't making those choices. But I think it was around that time that she sort of realized all the dirty secrets essentially of the horse industry. And I think that was very disillusioning too. So I think both of my parents basically were just dealing with sort of normal 40-ish shit, and like but it's, you know, it doesn't make it trivial. And like aging family and all the things that drudges up, and family members then dying. And then my grandmother having dementia, and like she was very, I think, I can't imagine how hard it must be and how scary it must be to go through the world knowing your brain is deteriorating, right?
Yes.
But she acted out just not the most graceful through that process, and lived with my family a little bit when I was 19 or 20. I wasn't home at all really during that time frame, but other than for the occasional visit. But my grandmother would like lock my sister out of the house. My sister would be the only one home sometime. Like my parents were traveling a lot for other stuff, and like my sister got locked out of the house for like a solid day, I think. Mm-hmm. And then my sister's boyfriend,
back before cell phones.
We sort of, yeah, like you had like brick phone, yeah, and they didn't work on our farm. Plus her boyfriend, like all of these things are happening. And meanwhile, my sister's like trying to be professional, like trying to get into conservatory as a ballerina and doing all the things that go along with that, and struggling with all the things that go along with that. And also her boyfriend through the middle of high school, for her high school and my college, had lymphoma. So she had a lot going on. And then
she did. You had a
I had
lot
my own
going
stuff
on.
too. And there was a fight with my mom one time when I was visiting her in Florida. She was there for horses a lot in the winter, where she was like, "You're just always so wrapped up in your own shit." And I think I don't know if I said it back or not, but in my head I was like, I'm 19. That's how it's supposed to be. Like,
Were you always like an old soul?
I think so.
Yeah.
It helped that we had a family friend who
the Pisces in you.
Probably that too. But yeah, we had a family friend who like was my surrogate older sister in a way. And like I spent a lot of time at her place in high school because she was an adult. She's 9, 10. She's 10-ish years older than me. Mm-hmm. I don't know exactly how many. But I would spend a lot of time at her place in high school, and then I would call her a lot when I was struggling, because she had an almost daughter like relationship with my mother, so she could really relate to a lot of and still loved her, right? Like still also could sort of recenter even me and like doing
help
the best.
You understand it.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or at least just like recenter and like, we love her, she loves you.
Did you always hang out with older people?
Spent a lot of time with adults. So like, especially with the farm,
yeah,
it was hard to spend time with my peers because it took a lot of effort on either side. But I would just like go down, my social interaction would just be like wandering down to the barn and like tagging along while adults were doing things.
Yeah,
and
I was the baby, so I was always tagging along with my mom. So I always hung out with her and her girlfriends and had adult conversations and was giving them advice. And every weekend I spent at horse shows, like from all through elementary and middle school. Yeah, there was a lot of adult interaction throughout. And my parents, I think,
prided themselves too on sort of socializing us that way. If we would, I remember also being taught strict manners even as a young kid. That was a kind of a debate between my parents, I think. But my dad would be like, learning how to use utensils properly and like what manners was very important from early on. So that in part so that we could be trusted to go out in public and behave ourselves. Again, probably not how they would describe it. Might not post this where they can find it.
You're fine. What is one of your earliest memories of feeling love?
Pictures make this so hard, right? Because you see pictures and you're like, I can see how there's something that almost feels visceral about seeing a picture of yourself as a baby feeling loved. But like, I don't know if is that my memory or is that just me interpreting a picture? I find early memory questions really hard in general, as I think you know. That's why you did this.
Sorry. This is the first time I've made you actually really have to think about something, probably.
Sounds good. This is kind of messed up, but in a way, I sort of remember when I was 2, I think, I was trying to give CPR. My way of playing doctor was very involved. And so I was trying to give CPR to a China doll. I think I must have seen it on TV. And P.S. My parents telling their part of the story is like, how did you know what CPR was? You were 2. I was trying to give CPR to a China doll.
I'm not surprised at all.
And her foot broke under my knee. And I got a slice in my knee and I remember, I sort of remember going into the room that my parents were talking to my grandparents in. This was at my grandparents' house. And being like, ow. And my memory of this, whether accurate or not, is I didn't really want to interrupt them because I was already being taught manners and adults were talking. And, bless you. All these things.
That was loud. Sorry to anyone listening. I'm sorry that I interrupted you.
But I went in there and I was like, excuse me, but we probably should deal with this. Ouchies. And then everybody sort of flipped. It's like I wasn't scolded for interrupting the adult conversation. It wasn't, why did I do this or whatever? Just immediately everybody went into like, oh, Jessica, like, let's deal with this mode. And then we went to the hospital and I got stitches and I was very brave, according to the doctor. Didn't cry much. There was probably a sucker that I was told I would get if I was quiet. But yeah, I think just that, and maybe that's part of why I'm pretty sure that's an actual memory of like, probably even being worried that I was going to like get in trubs for interrupting the adult conversation and just actually feeling like everybody sort of dropped everything and was there for me.
That's really sweet. Okay. How about this? What has been your greatest lesson in love?
I only get one.
How about anything that you want to share? What are some lessons you've learned about love?
I remember there was something I was thinking about this recently that I told my partner, my now husband too.
You mean your second one?
Yes, my second husband, current. And just starts to require lots of clarification. But when we were first getting together, the first holiday season after we started dating, we went down to LA to visit his family, and I met his family for the first time. And we were coming back from a run, and it was just us. And, it was like total honeymoon phase in general. We had been friends for a long time before, and I had definitely put him through the ringer as we formed our relationship, but still do. But I think one of the things that I remember, we talked on that run about like how great everything was. And I think it was like nice for him that the family meeting, I think he was like pleasantly surprised that his family was actually being like, his words was that his family was actually being nice to me and stuff like that. Cause he was like, they usually seem to just basically assume that like these women that they meet are like a passing fling, because he described as a serial monogamist before me. And he was like, they seem to like actually like you and be, investing and getting to know you a little bit. And I was like, well, yeah. And then that sort of spiraled into
like, well, yeah, I'm the boss.
I'm pretty great.
Yeah.
I'm also like, I wouldn't have come here. They probably can also tell that I'm not the type of woman who's going to like go visit family if I'm not like, okay, like I care.
Yeah.
But then that sort of spiraled into just generally talking about our relationship. And I remember, I think he was sort of just gushing. He's a very romantic human, as you might have gathered having met him. But he was, I think, just generally gushing. And I was like, so we are always there for each other. And like, we have done this really wonderful job so far of being able to have this wonderful volley of like, I'm there for you when you need me. And you're there for me when we're there for each other when one of us needs each other.
You have a really great saying about this, actually.
Oh, maybe that's what I'm getting to, but now I'm curious.
I think it's what you guys tell each other. I don't know. I wrote it down.
Well, yeah. Let's save that for a second.
Okay.
Because that came along later, but that is a pretty great saying. Okay. We said that a lot. We say that all the time.
Okay.
Said that this morning. But I was like, I think the challenge, I was like, so yes, we're in a totally blissful state. And I was like, we haven't been through anything really hard yet together, though. And you know what? Where this relationship's really going to prove itself is when one of us needs the other one and we can't deliver. Like, and that's, if it's like, let's say that I'm the one who needs you and you can't be there for me in that moment because you're dealing with something of your own, we'll know it's real if I'm able to be like, wow, that hurts, but I still love you. And I think that
is so beautiful.
I think that's real love, is the love where you can be like, I really needed you right now and you couldn't be there for me. And it doesn't mean that I question whether I love you or the relationship or whatever, but like it can still sting and it still means you didn't get what you needed and there's still things to talk about and unpack and whatever and that, but it shouldn't be like a crisis of confidence. Well, in
the relationship.
Right. It can feel like it in the moment, but
depending on your attachment style, for sure.
I'm increasingly pretty sure I'm disorganized, so that's really fun for everybody.
Depends on what side of that you land on, but
yeah.
Okay, that's really beautiful.
But that probably leads into the other of like, as we've sorted ourselves out and proven out our relationship over coming up on 7 years, where we've landed is that we choose each other always. We love each other mostly. And we like each other sometimes. And like that has to all be okay. But we even when we're having challenges in our relationship, we will even say to each other in the middle of what basically is a fight of, I choose you. Like that can be such a diffusing thing for us.
It has to be a choice. It's a choice. It's a daily choice.
Yes. Some days easier than others.
I mean, love is a verb. There is work around it. Yes, I get that we attribute a bunch of feelings to it. Mm-hmm. We absolutely do. And I'm not saying that there aren't some really beautiful aspects of loving people that really, feels good.
Yeah.
But when you're in partnership with someone, it is a choice. Even in relationships with your family, it's still a choice of whether or not you show up to that. And it always gets to be a choice, but you have to actively, consistently choose it. That's what makes a relationship work.
Yes.
Romantic or otherwise.
Well, and respecting the boundaries when somebody says, I do love you and I cannot choose to do that for you right now.
Or I cannot choose you even.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
Doesn't mean they don't love you.
Right.
Still love my ex.
You do.
It's part of why we got divorced.
It's because
I
you
loved him
him
so much to let that little bird fly. No, but for reals, actually, that one in particular, that was a lot of my messaging when we were separating, but I was genuinely, still am, convinced that like the best thing for both of us was to acknowledge that the people we grew into should not be together and would be so much better off without trying to figure out how to navigate a relationship together. And also, I don't know, we're not in touch, but all signs of the limited signals I get about how he's doing would suggest I was 100% right. Even for him. And I know that was true for me.
Huh. How did you get to a place of knowing that?
A lot of therapy.
Okay. For anyone who's listening or watching, here's a little tidbit for you.
I mean, that's the short, cheeky answer. But
yeah.
I had to figure, I needed therapy. I went to my therapist initially because we were fighting a lot and I blamed myself. And I thought it was because I like internalized a lot of narratives from a few people, myself included, about this was, we were fighting and because I wasn't happy in my job or whatever. And so I went to the therapist initially being like, something's off. I don't know whether it's my job or what. I don't know if maybe I'm the problem and I need to change. But this state cannot continue. I can't be miserable in all the things that I'm doing. And I think I'm actually a pretty great person. So let's figure that out. And then we peeled back a lot of pieces and no, actually, the more, and she helped me a lot just to embody. She had started out as a massage therapist before she went to and did the school and so on to become an LMFT. And then was just even before somatics were quite as big a deal as they are now, was very much I remember early on in working with her, I would be sitting in meetings even, I would be like, how do my toes feel? How do my toes feel? Because it would be the opposite of it's the opposite end of my body from my head. Mm-hmm. And breath work and so on. And it was a gateway drug for other stuff. So a lot of it was just figuring out to love myself and what that meant. And then figuring out that I initially just tried to do a better job of being very clear about what I needed and what I wanted and what I hoped for, and trying to get some of the same from him. And even with needs, being clear about these are things I need. I'm not saying you absolutely have to provide them, but if you cannot, if there are things I need from the world, she did a great job, I think, of distinguishing for me, helping me to distinguish for myself. What do I need from the world versus my partner versus myself? What do I want from the world versus my partner versus myself? What do I hope for from the world versus my partner versus myself? So that there was not only that distinction between need, want, and hope, but also what are the right sources for these things?
Like a needs assessment.
Yeah.
Which a lot of people never do.
Yeah.
Or you never have the chance to do, or it was never modeled to you.
Right.
Yeah. Who sits down and really does that stuff? I mean, we do, but we run in a different world, I feel like.
Well, and my favorite is now being at retreats and stuff like that and having people be like, so if I just do it this time, almost as though once you do it, once you figure this exercise out, you're done. I'm like, no.
You'll be doing that until you're 80.
I do this exercise all the time, and it's always evolving.
Yeah.
And I don't say this because I'm usually just another participant, and I'm not going to butt in on but
yeah. The tools that you accrue, hopefully, you upgrade them occasionally as you come upon new ones or better versions. But the tools that you acquire are assisting you. There is no magic pill that is one and done. The stuff that I learned 15 years ago from my psychiatrist, I'm still applying now. You know, the work that I did 10 years ago in an intensive, I teach other people some of the foundational things that I learned. Like I am still soothing my child. I am still doing it, even though I'm working with you to soothe your child and show you how I do it or how it was instructed to me. But the point is I'm still doing it. It doesn't mean that all of a sudden now I'm healed everything. I've healed everything. I just walk around totally not triggered at all ever.
If only. Although I say if only, but I'm also like, I am increasingly of the belief that like, what a boring fucking world that would be if everybody was just like, everything is fine.
I am at peace.
Like, I don't know. I would like not to have extremes like war and rape and murder and all these break-ins in Portland and stuff like that.
Do you feel like maybe humanity could evolve to a more loving vibration, however, and that doesn't necessarily have to be boring? I mean, maybe the reason why we think that's boring is because we are so addicted to drama and trauma.
Right. We just started watching Star Trek to help us better answer that question.
Oh.
Because in theory, that's I have heard that's sort of the premise for Star Trek is that humans have had this opportunity to evolve to like a post-capitalist, where
I never knew that
all
that
their
was
needs
the
are
premise
met.
of Star Trek, but that's hysterical.
So you just get to go explore.
With it. Yeah, I was obsessed with it when I was a kid.
I've only seen 2 episodes so far, so I'll let you know.
That's it?
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, I mean, I've watched some over the years, but not like continuously.
Okay, interesting. Well, let me know how you feel about it. Okay. Let's see. I'm checking time. Okay, so ooh. Okay. What are you still working on healing?
Everything. No. It's a useless answer. Going through career shift and so there was like, I knew that going through my big career shift would be a lot. Because I left my corporate job a number of it'll be 6 months in April.
It's been 6 months?
In April. It's coming up on it. And as you know, this was not a short, it wasn't like all of us, I wasn't just like blindsided by a layoff or something. This was sort of a long time coming.
Well, and also a conscious decision there at the end. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because you chose you.
Right.
Which I want everyone to know without you explaining exactly what happened.
Yeah,
but you essentially were up against choosing you.
Yep.
Yeah.
And that brought up a lot from my divorce. And which had been, that'll be 10 years next year. So I will have separated. It's been 9 years, eight, 9 years since I separated from my ex.
So much has changed in the last 10 years for you. That is crazy.
Yeah. Because I was 31 when we separated, just turned. And I turned 40 in August. So yeah, it's been a wild 10 years.
Yeah, it has.
And the 10 years before that were, I don't know, I'm a high growth individual. But
you're just here to experience all the pleasures.
Yes. And just evolving how I define those. But I think that it brought up a lot around choosing myself and like, where do I still have, where is there still shadow work to be done, essentially? And interesting, it's funny how these things always happen this way. During COVID, in August of 2020, my dad was diagnosed with stage 2 pancreatic cancer, and then he was able to fight that back. He went into remission, and then it came back this past spring as stage 4. And that sucks. And he's been in the hospital he's had some pretty terrible acute things since like in September, right before I like officially ended my last corporate relationship. And then he was in the hospital again in January, right after I formed my business, or with the state. I haven't launched it yet, but so that's interesting, both in terms of just, my own. I like to joke that I'm Olaf in Frozen 2, where, have you seen the movie?
Yeah, but not enough that I would know
A lot of people don't pick. Yeah, a lot of people clearly were not as fixated on Olaf as I was. Olaf is the snowman.
Yes.
And in Frozen 2 in particular, he's just like having this existential awakening, essentially. I wouldn't say it's entirely a crisis, because a lot of the time he's like, I don't remember any of the quotes and they're too good. I wouldn't do a good job. But he's basically like running around being like, oh my God, what is, like, life is finite? Like, what? And like he's dealing with his own mortality and everybody else's mortality. And Olaf obviously is magic. So this is extra hilarious. But I've always enjoyed philosophy and existentialism and so on. COVID was obviously interesting for all of us on that front. And then we add this like protracted, I don't know, is my dad going to die tomorrow? Like state. And hopefully not. But just that acute sense of, wow, we really just never know. Like we never, and like I could get hit by a car walking to my car this afternoon. And like I've done a lot of extremes.
Cancel that.
Right. Yeah, let's not do that. I've done a lot of extreme sports, and I do a lot of dangerous things by choice. And it's just interesting how even my relationship with some of that stuff has shifted over time. And then my current husband got laid off. There was like this 1 week where I incorporated. My husband got laid off unexpectedly from a job he really wanted to like work for 15, and he wanted to work for that company for 15 more years. And then my dad went into the hospital with some pretty major stuff a few days later. And it was just a lot, right? And that digs up things from all the things we've talked about. It digs up stuff from my own divorce. It digs up stuff from, especially because my ex was unemployed or underemployed the entire time that we were together. And so like I just have and we have to do taxes right now. Like taxes are always emotional for me. And my husband and I are figuring out how to do them together for the first time. And like that's an interesting power struggle. And we both have not matching baggage on that one, which we've been talking about. But it's like a lot, but those are all things I'm kind of there's like a lot of healing in all of that, right? Like and what I guess fundamentally I'm healing on like loving myself. One of the things I'm working on with my therapist right now is that my needs matter. She does energy healing. And so rather than talking through it, there's just a lot of energy work we're actually doing around that of like my needs matter. And we're almost done with that, but I'm kind of in this like liminal state with that, which I look forward to wrapping that one. It's always interesting to see how that stuff evolves while she's working on these issues. And then I'm pretty sure my next one will be something along the lines of like, I am loved and lovable even when my needs can't be met. Because I think that's actually the next layer of that onion is we were talking about earlier of like, it would not be fair to expect my partner, the world, my parents, whoever, to always meet my needs. But that doesn't mean I'm not, and like, it's easy for my inner child to then be like, I'm not lovable. I'm not loved. And it's like, no, you're still loved and lovable. They're people. Like, I don't know. How do I meet my own needs?
How do I love myself?
Right.
How am I loving myself in this moment? How do I love everything that's happening right now? How do you love everything that's happening right now?
Good question. I tried.
Lots of compassion.
Yeah. I try to take a lot of like little mini breaks to be like, no, you're still loved. Like, and I love myself. So I like something that I started doing when I was, I don't remember if it was out of the retreat or just coincidental timing, but I would through some particularly tough things last summer and early fall, I would often be like, I would just close my eyes for a second and be like, you are not in bodily danger. Your flight, fight, or flee response is in your head. It is programming that was designed to keep you alive if you're being chased by a saber-toothed tiger. There is no saber-toothed tiger. This is all fine. Like, it's all okay. Just deep breaths. Like, you are safe.
You're going to get through it.
Right.
Yeah. You always do.
Yes.
And I think, or I feel like I should say, that is something that I've acquired over time. And I was just expressing this to somebody a couple of days ago, that as you get older, one of the experiences, at least, or the lessons that I feel like I've learned, or that I can rely on much better than maybe in my 20s. Doesn't matter that I'm an anxious attachment style that'll never go away, or that I have hypervigilance because I come from a trauma background, or whatever. The point being is that I've learned, and maybe it started with being on Jamie's podcast because she asked me an interesting question. But the point is I've been thinking about this, that I know that I can get through something because I've been through worse circumstances, or I've been through circumstances that are similar, or I've had that practice over and over and over again. So a lot of times, even in the dark, when I can't see the light, even if I haven't been through something like what I'm going through right now, divorce, right? I've been through other challenging times in my life, and I've made it through, and I've not always figured out immediately how I'm going to, but eventually I know that there will be a way out of it. And I think it's easy to get caught up in the moment of being in it, right?
Yes.
And so, yeah, I mean, when you say, how do you love everything that's happening? You, through practice, at least my experience is, you become more comfortable with being uncomfortable. You get more practice with it. Doesn't mean that I normalize it or that I want it to stay or not shift, right? But sitting with it and being really present with it and having compassion for all of my feelings around it, and stopping and actually allowing myself to shift through those feelings, or allowing myself to give me whatever it is that I need that moment that other people aren't able to give to me.
Yeah.
And certainly I can ask for help and support, and I do. But yeah, I always bring the focus back to me and how I can help myself through something.
Even while the inner child or teen is like, but why do we have to do this again?
Why? Why can't someone else, please?
Why can't it just be easy for like a few months?
Yeah. Well, I think that you've been in a huge transition for a lot of your life, but that comes from living boldly.
Yeah.
I mean, you've chosen, just by listening to your story, like, and we didn't even get into all the nooks and crannies, but because we could have gone 3,000 ways, but you have experienced really big things. You've made really bold choices. You were not meek.
No.
You were not like, I'm just going to live like this quiet little life. It may have been quiet in ways, but the point is like, you really made some big choices. And I think in doing that and having that amount of bravery or courage, I think that's, you and I share that, living kind of fiercely throughout the world. And so we haven't taken it easy. We haven't taken the easy path.
Yeah.
And because we haven't taken the easy path, we learned the biggest lessons, but it also taught us a lot about who we are and how strong we are. So maybe that's what you're learning right now, or maybe that's what's affirming, is how strong you are, or how powerful you are amidst things falling apart.
Yeah.
Because you are.
Thanks.
You're welcome. And you're going to get through it.
Yes. You too.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, is that a good stopping place? Were there some questions that you wanted to ask me?
There were.
Okay. Well, you're okay? You feel complete, though?
Yes.
Okay.
I am complete.
Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for sharing everything that you shared.
Yeah.
And yeah, do you have any advice or wisdom after talking about loving everything? Being the new coach that you're becoming?
Get back on that pony.
That's the mantra. Everybody, just keep going.
Yeah.
Just
I think
going.
that is a lot of it. It's just,
It is one foot in front of the other, even when you don't even know where you are.
just keep swimming.
Just keep going. Yeah.
So you're a mom.
Oh, yes.
Oh, I don't get to.
Yeah. Go.
I obviously have an experience as a daughter.
Mm-hmm.
But I, as somebody who's chosen not to have children and will continue to choose not to have children, I'd be interested in what, that's one part of life I know I cannot understand. I feel like maternal love is its own beautiful, wonderful thing, and like seems to me like possibly the most unconditional of conditional loves.
It depends on the parent.
True.
I think it's really hard to be unconditional with a child if you haven't learned it yourself. If you grew up with conditional love and it was never important to you to surround yourself with something other than that, and you didn't shift that somehow or learn it, it's really hard to do it for other people, irregardless of whether or not they're related to you. I mean, there's some horrific mothers out there that have done some really crazy ass shit with their kids. So no, I don't think that's just a given. But do I know unconditional love more because I'm a mother? That's a really good question.
Or how has it shaped how you look at how you love?
Well, I mean, I had my daughter as a single parent, so I had to make that conscious choice to go against what everybody else was screaming at me. You know, nobody was really behind me having a child. I was 23 and everybody else had different wishes for me, including her father. So I really, I guess, you know, I really wanted to be a parent. I had already had an abortion. I had made a conscious choice to not have a child with somebody I was in love with in college, and it felt like a huge sacrifice. And it was something that I've wanted to do as far back as I can remember, is be a mom. That's really, really, I wanted that more than college. I wanted to be a mom. And so she was a miraculous child, first of all. Circumstances being what they are, without getting into too much of that story. We only had sex once, so she really was kind of a miracle child. And when I got pregnant out of that situation, I was like, this is unreal. I can't not have this child. This child keeps wanting to come through. And I knew that even back then. I'd gotten pregnant twice without trying and because of weird circumstances. And I was like, I just knew at a soul level, yes, I was this deep. At a soul level, I just knew that I just had this knowing, like that child kept trying to come in, and I was calling it in, or they needed to be here for a reason. And I just knew that. Nobody else knew that. I couldn't explain it to anyone. I seemed crazy. And, you know, in having her, she's taught me more about being a complete person than anybody ever could. You know, we're very, very close, probably because I raised her singly for the most part, even though I was married. He never really truly took her on. I mean, he adopted her, but he didn't establish a really close bond with her or really make an effort. So she and I have been very close. We've been partners. We definitely have had other lives together. And it's very, very clear. And we remember some aspects of it and joke around about it. And so I would say that I don't know that she taught me unconditional love, but I definitely have unconditional love for her, probably more than anybody. More than anybody, she can show up however she needs to be. I think that's the greatest gift. And maybe I learned that from reading The Prophet. Do you ever read The Prophet?
Mm-mm.
It's not that thick of a book. I cannot think of the author right now, but I'll tell you afterwards, or we'll look it up. The Prophet, I read that when I was in college, and there's this really beautiful, it's a poem. There's this really beautiful description of what children are. And I know that there's this part in there. I read this maybe when I was pregnant with her, but it was just my entire framework for how I became a mother with her, because I knew I wanted to do it differently than my mother. And there's this really beautiful part in it that says, children come from you, but they don't. Wait, children come from you, but they don't. They aren't yours. They come through you. Right? And so I think that our relationship has really cultivated a sense of trust in me allowing her to be the person that she needs to become, and me supporting her in this lifetime to become that person, more than it has ever been on what I truly have ever wanted for her. Does that make sense? And maybe that's where the unconditional part comes from. I don't know. Did that answer your question? You asked me if I learned unconditional love from her. I learned unconditional love, and I talked about this on another episode. I learned unconditional love from a teacher. I never even knew what that concept was until college. And a teacher pointed out that my mom was not loving me. Sounded like my mom didn't know or understand unconditional love. And that sent me down a wormhole. And, back to that parenting, I always wanted to, I told her at 12 that I was going to write a book on how not to become a parent. And I think I might have told you guys all that up to the Shasta retreat. But, I really wanted to be a better mom. And there was something that, I love children. It's part of the reason why I became a parent. Elementary school and high school teacher and substitute taught and did all of the grades. I really, really love children, and I'm really good with them, and I always have been. And so I think they're a great reflection of unconditional love. They're a great reflection of it. So maybe she's taught me unconditional love more than I've taught it to her. I think that would be a better phrase, or a better way of me articulating our relationship. She's taught me more about it because I did not receive it from my family. It was not something that, came easily for the generational trauma that I come from. I'm not saying that there wasn't any unconditional love. I'm sure there wasn't. But yes, for the most part, it had a lot of conditions.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Anything else?
You've had the privilege of working with lots of clients where you get to really dig into conversations to some extent like this, and you get to essentially work with them on loving themselves. You can reframe my paraphrase, and with the additional privilege of having some access to what they are accessing about their traumas, if that makes sense. And so I think all of that is just a very special situation where casual conversations about love don't typically get to the level of depth that you get to see with a wide variety of people. And so I'm curious how that's shaped. You ask great questions for one, which helps, but how does that shape how you look at how you think about love, and what do you, maybe just sort of like you were asking me about, what are some of the lessons you've learned about love that maybe specifically come through that client work?
Wow, that's a good question, Jess. Okay, let's see. Well, I think what I love to do more than anything is share what I know. But I also love when I have the opportunity to work with somebody, the fact that they are learning something that I've learned, obviously, or can teach them, but that we're doing it together. And I love the relationship that we get to build, first of all. I love that somebody else can reflect to me how to better love themselves, because maybe they've also learned some techniques that I haven't learned, or they've picked up some things. You've picked up things from coaches or stuff that you've shared with me that have been really interesting. So other people expand my knowledge about how to love themselves, and I get to see people love parts of themselves that they didn't think was lovable. That's really beautiful. Or that other people haven't loved, or that I get to experience teaching somebody how to love an aspect of them that was never loved by them. And that is really beautiful too, because that I get to watch somebody really grow. That's something that I really, really enjoy, is watching someone love either something that happened to them or something about themselves that hasn't been loved before. And that seems to be the biggest shift or transformation for people, is when they start to love aspects of them that they just didn't even know were there, or that they were ignoring, or that somebody else has ignored. And because they start to throw love that direction, it subsides, or the energy around it shifts so drastically that they become more fully alive. It's almost like they've activated some parts of them that were dead or disassociated, right? Or activated, but not activated in a positive way. And because they have an opportunity to shift the energy around that, they glow differently, they grow differently, they expand more, you can just see that they've become more awakened or more fully conscious, or more fully aware, or more fully embodied, or more fully expressed. So that's really, I guess, that's probably what I love the most about getting to know different aspects of people that they wouldn't normally share with the general public, is really the fact that people trust me to love them, or to model love to them, and that they trust me enough to share and allow me to witness and encourage them and inspire them to think or feel differently than they have before. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for such thoughtful questions. They were really great. Thank you for being here. Thank you for your support of me. Thank you for your friendship. And thank you most of all for being such a thoughtful, incredible human being and person. Watching you in the last almost year has been incredible. And I'm really, really excited to see what you are cultivating. And I know it's just at its beginning stages, but it's really, really wonderful to see you come alive.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much.
You're so welcome. All right. Until next time.